If a majority of Scots had really wanted independence when they had the referendum, and they didn't, they didn't want it, but they want it again now. We do not negotiate with terrorists. They're not terrorists. Or are they? No. Okay, so we are on englishtestonline.com today, and that's the final plug I'm going to give them before I steal all of their content. Let's have a look at this then. We've got an advanced level grammar quiz. There are going to be 20 questions. Hopefully I can get them all right and explain how I've got the correct answer. Let's just get into it. Let's look at number one. Question number one says, we have to fill in the blank, and it says, if the others hadn't voted in favour of the younger candidate, I probably wouldn't have done so. Even, either, to, also, as well. Well, I imagine probably if you've got an advanced level, you're not going to think it's even, because that means including that, right? So even just doesn't really fit in this at all. But it is very typical for people to write to, also, or as well, in this situation, in a sentence like this. But that would go in a positive sentence. So you could say, I would have done also, or I also would have done so, or I would have done so too, or I would have done so as well. But this is negative. I probably wouldn't have done so either. So like the others, I wouldn't have done that either. Neither would I have done so. So it'd be a little bit like ever and never and things like that. Neither, neither, either, either, right? So yeah, the correct answer here is clearly either. Or either, depends how you want to pronounce it. Yeah, okay, let's move on to question number two. Okay, so scientists rely on computers to model phenomena, two words missing, would be difficult to observe. Okay, so they rely on computers to observe phenomena that they can't, because it would be difficult to observe. So I think I've got an idea without looking at the options of what the two words might be. Whereby would in case, no way. So such as would nonetheless be difficult. Now that makes no sense at all. Which would nevertheless be difficult. That would otherwise be difficult. So that, in fact, would be... No, so what we want to say here is that they rely on computers to observe phenomena, and that without those computers, observing would be difficult. So, otherwise, in another situation, right? So I think I would say phenomena that would otherwise, in a different circumstance, without the computers, would be difficult to observe. Yeah, it has to be that otherwise. I'm pretty sure about that one. Okay, good. 2 out of 2. Hopefully we're going on. We're going to continue in this streak of form. Okay, so in question number 3, the lawyer decided to call of the witnesses only and paid no attention to Right, so decided to call both of the witnesses only. Well, that doesn't make sense, because if it's both, that suggests there are 2, and there are only 2. So you can't say both only. That's contradictory. If you call both of them, that's the maximum. So why would you say only? That makes no sense. So A, I'm going to rule out A. Decided to call the two of the witnesses. You could say 2 of the witnesses, but not the 2 of the witnesses. And again, if it's the 2, it suggests there are only 2. So again, putting only wouldn't really make sense there. All right, C. Decided to call 2 of the witnesses only. Right, so only 2 of the total. We don't know how many there were in total. But he decided to call 2 of the witnesses only and paid no attention to The others that exist, the rest of them. Yeah, C definitely makes sense. Let's just check the others. Decided to call some of the witnesses only. All right, yeah, rather than all of them, but paid no attention to another. Well, that doesn't really make sense. Another witness of the witnesses that he didn't call, that doesn't make sense. Decided to call any of the witnesses. Any, as you should know, can only go in a sentence that is already negative, right? So the lawyer didn't decide to call any of the witnesses, you could say. But no, it wouldn't make sense here. Now, clearly the correct answer here is C. All right, good. Let's move on to question 4. Okay. The embargo imposed on us is lifted in the near future. We can't hope for any economic recovery. I think this one's fairly easy. Whereas, while, because, in case, unless. So I'm saying if they don't lift the embargo, which prevents us from trading, we can't hope for any economic recovery. Yeah, so it clearly has to be unless, no? I think. Okay, so far so good. Let's move on to question 5. Okay, so in question number 5 here, we've got a couple of collocations. Really, you know them or you don't. We are prevented completing the project time due to unforeseen circumstances. I'm a little bit unsure about the sentence, the meaning of the sentence, because I'm surprised that it's in present simple. We are prevented. Is this something that happens to you habitually? Or is this a situation that you're in now? I suppose we are prevented. Yeah, maybe. Okay, all right. You are prevented from doing something. So you're prevented from completing the project on time, so within the stipulated deadline, due to unforeseen circumstances. Yeah, it clearly has to be A. All right, let's move on to question 6. So several experts were working on the project and each came up with some interesting proposals and naturally claimed that was the best. Yeah, I think I know what this will be. Many claimed that each was the best. That makes no sense. Many of the experts claimed that all of them were the best. I don't think so. I think each expert came up with his or her individual idea, their idea, right? Some claimed that its was the best, that people, we're not going to have a possessive adjective like it's. No, that's not going to work, no. C, we claim that it was the best. No, makes no sense. Each expert, option D, each claimed that his was the best. We could say that, I guess, if all of the experts were male. Normally we would say each claimed that theirs was the best, I think, is what I would use. The possessive pronoun, sorry there. Each claimed that theirs was the best. But okay, if they're all men, fine. Each claimed that his was the best. That sounds good. All claimed that he was the best. A person was the best. No, we're talking about something that belongs to these experts. So we would use his. Yeah, it has to be D. That's the only viable option there. Good, let's move on. Okay, so question, what are we on? Question 8, 7? 7. We're on question 7. Hey, there we go. Okay, so question 7 says, today the expansion of knowledge in astronomy, physics, chemistry and biology is vast and complex and multiplying quickly to be mastered fully. All right, so let's have a look at the possible options there. I think there are several things that occur to me before I look at the options, but Yeah, let's have a look. So vast and complex and multiplying that quickly to be mastered fully. No, we want something prohibitive right here because it says to be mastered fully. So I think it's multiplying so fast that it is impossible to master it fully. So is too vast and complex and multiplying too quickly to be mastered fully. I think B would work. B would work, yeah. It's too vast and too complex and multiplying too quickly. Those things, that they're prohibited, right? It's happening so fast that it is impossible. It's happening too quickly to master it. It is too vast and too complex, right? It's restrictive. It means it's impossible to master. So 2 would work in both of those. Just as vast and complex. As quickly, no, makes no sense. As well as quickly, no. So vast and so and complex and multiplying so quickly sounds good. To be mastered fully, so would work if we said so vast and complex and multiplying so quickly that it is impossible to master fully. But no, the only one that works there is 2 and 2, yeah, because they're the only ones that restrict something from happening. It's too much, right? Okay, let's move on to question 8. Okay, so the Hollywood studio system in filmmaking, which began 1920 and flourished from the early 1930s, the 1950s, is unique in Western culture. Okay, I've got an idea, I think. So it began throughout 1920, so it began various times in the year 1920. That just doesn't sound right. The early 1930s into the 1950s, that does sound okay, but I wouldn't go with A. Around 1920, yeah, I guess so, because the studio method or system of making films, I suppose it didn't start on the 25th of February 1920, did it? It probably developed over time, so I'd say, yeah, around 1920 sounds good, and flourished from the early 1930s through the 1950s. So I think I would normally say through to the 1950s, through to, but I think through the 1950s is correct as well. From the early 1930s, from early 1930s through the 1950s, yeah, I think that sounds right. Is unique in Western culture. I think B sounds good. Began by 1920, had been invented by 1920 maybe, but no. No. And then until the 1950s, no, it is still going. No, it is unique in Western culture now, so definitely not C. Within 1920, happened within that year, it began within that year, that doesn't really make sense. Over the 1950s, along 1920 till the 1950s, again, no. No, I think the only one that would make sense there to me is B. Good, let's move on. Okay, so question number 9 of 20. Proving useful in many scientific fields, computer generated knowledge, Professor Hayes acknowledges, is not without pitfalls. So it is very useful in certain fields, in certain scientific fields, but it does have problems, it does have drawbacks and disadvantages. Okay, so pitfalls. Although proving useful in many scientific fields, that sounds good. Computer generated knowledge, because Professor Hayes acknowledges, no, that doesn't sound right. It's not without it doesn't have disadvantages because Professor Hayes acknowledges it. No. Since proving useful in many scientific fields, that already sounds wrong. While Professor Hayes acknowledges is not. No, that's all wrong. C. While proving useful in many scientific fields, that sounds good. Computer-generated knowledge, as Professor Hayes acknowledges, is not without its pitfalls. Right, yeah. So it is true on the one hand that it is proving useful in some scientific fields. So while proving useful in some scientific fields, this is also true, as Professor Hayes acknowledges, as he has said as well. So I would definitely say C works well. Yeah. D, as long as, on the condition that, as long as proving it, that doesn't make sense. Even if he acknowledges that, no, makes no sense. Once proving useful, so it isn't now. Whether or not Professor Hayes acknowledges is without its pitfalls. It doesn't matter if he acknowledges it or not. No, it makes no sense. The only one that makes sense there is C, I think. Good. All right, let's continue to question 10. So we've reached the halfway point. Hopefully we can pick up a bit of speed here. Question 10. Suggestion he may make as regards to the tax rate. Let's not give any response. We have discussed the matter thoroughly together. However suggestion, A. However suggestion, that already doesn't make sense. However suggestion he may make. No. Whyever suggestion he may make. No, that doesn't make sense. Whatsoever. He made no suggestion whatsoever, but whatsoever suggestion? Nah. Whatever suggestion. It doesn't matter what suggestion he makes. Whatever suggestion he makes as regards the tax rate, let's not give any response until we have discussed the matter thoroughly together, right? So we need to do that. Doesn't matter what he proposes, we're not going to give him an answer until we've managed to talk about it together. Yeah, I think definitely has to be D. Whenever suggestion. That just doesn't make sense. None of them would collocate with suggestion there, right? Except whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever he says, we're not going to give him an answer until we've had time to discuss it together. So, yeah, definitely D there. Okay. Question 11. Okay, controversial. Most newspapers are of the opinion that if a majority of Scots really independence, the British Parliament has no option but to their wishes. We do not negotiate with terrorists. They're not terrorists. Or are they? No. Anyway, shut up. So Scots really, did want, if the majority of Scots really did want independence, hypothetically, the British Parliament has no option but had acceded to that. No, that doesn't make sense. Has no option, had acceded, no. If a majority of Scots really wanted independence, yeah, that's good again, hypothetical, second conditional. Has no option but have acceded. Again, the second part doesn't make sense. If a majority of Scots had wanted independence when they had the referendum and they didn't, they didn't want it, but they want it again now. Anyway, had wanted independence, it makes sense. Has no option would have acceded. Again, that doesn't make sense, the second part. If a majority of Scots really do want, so we're emphasising, they really do want independence, the British Parliament has no option but to accede to their wishes. It has no option but to do this, right? In infinitive, to accede to their wishes. Yeah, that one makes sense. If they would have wanted independence, no option but acceded. No, it's the second part always sounds wrong, except in D. D is the only one. If they want independence, the newspapers are saying, hey, we've got to accede. Oh, Braveheart. How much damage have you done, Mel Gibson? Anyway, let's have a look then at the answer. It is D, I think. Yeah, D. Yeah, good. All right, let's move on. Okay, so question number 12 looks a bit more complicated. It says, for 100 years or so, some critics that poetry is dying, and all that time poems that later generations recognize as great. So yeah, okay. Have maintained that poetry is dying for the last 100 years. That is what the critics have been doing. That sounds good to me. And all that time poets have been writing since this criticism started. All this time they have been writing poems that later generations recognize as great. So option A actually sounds good to me. Critics maintained, in B, maintained that poetry is dying. Doesn't quite sound right. It is dying now. They maintained that then. I don't think so. Had maintained that poetry is dying again. Maintain. For 100 years, some critics maintain. I think we need to use a perfect tense with for to say how long something has been happening, right? Or has happened. So, no, I don't think D is right. For 100 years or so, some critics would maintain. So if we're talking about a 100-year period in the past, that would be correct. Would maintain, that's what they would do. That poetry is dying. I think I would say that poetry was dying. So no, I think the only correct option there would be A. Yeah, okay, let's move on to question 13. Unlucky for some. Okay, so 13. What is that we to think seriously about a thorough reform in the legal system. Okay, so we're talking about a proposal and beginning to think seriously about legal reform. Okay, so what I have proposed, okay, is that we should have begun to think seriously. You're proposing that we should have done something. That doesn't quite sound right to me. What I had proposed is that we were beginning. So back then, before that point in the past, I had proposed that we were doing something. That makes no sense. What I am proposing, option C, is that we begin to think seriously. That makes sense. I'm proposing this. This is my idea. I think that what we need to do is begin to think seriously about reforming the legal system. Yeah, C makes sense. What I was proposing is we have begun. I was proposing that to say that we have done something now. It makes no sense. What I proposed was that we had begun. So I proposed that we had done something before I proposed it. Bizarre. No, the only one that makes sense there is C, definitely. What I'm proposing is that we begin to do this. Okay, let's move on to question 14. Okay, so the verbs we have here are publish and note. So what form do we think they're going to go in? So when the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli published a map of Mars in 1877, he noted a large number of straight linear features which he called canali, that is channels. Yeah, I think this would just go in past simple, right? So when he made the map, he noted, when he published the map, he noted a large number of straight linear features. I think there's no doubt about that. It has to be option D, past simple, no? Yeah, okay, let's move on. Question 15 of 20. If we, the terms of the contract, all the paintwork in the building finished by the 5th of next month. If we meet and something with B, right? So if we, okay. If we are to meet the terms of the contract, if that is what we are going to do, if we are to meet the terms of the contract, all of the paintwork in the building will have to be finished by the 5th of next month. It says in the contract that our deadline is the 5th day of the coming month, right? If we are to fulfill our contract, yeah, I think A is the best option without looking at the others. If we were meeting the terms of the contract, we will be in the building will be finished by the... I don't think so. If we met, would had to be by next month. Doesn't make sense. If we had met the terms of the contract, is being, doesn't make sense. If we will meet, if and will in the same part of the phrase, doesn't really make sense. Was being finished on the 5th of next month. No, it's clearly option A. All right, let's move on. Okay, so another tricky one here with other, each, and others. Let's have a look. We are confident that the management and the workforce will get on well together as long as respects A respects B. The other, who's the other? The other respects another. Is it some other person? No, it's not A. Both respects itself. I respect myself. I don't respect those people. The one respects another. Who's the other? Doesn't make sense. Everyone respects themselves, but don't respect other people. Nah. As long as each, so both the workforce and the management, as long as each respects the other, because there is another, right? There's the relationship that the workforce has with the management and the management with the workforce. As long as each respects the other, yes, it's got to be E. No? Great. So the term Aborigines signifies the original inhabitants of any country, the native tribes of Australia. Yeah, I always thought it was just for the natives of Australia, but as I've got older, I've heard it used to describe other people, particularly when you read old novels. They talk about Aboriginal tribes in South America, in North America, and places like that. I thought it was just for Australians, but yeah, it is, I suppose, with regard to, due to, in spite of, in particular, according to. No, I think it is in particular the native tribes of Australia. Yeah, it's used more commonly to describe the native tribes of Australia. Yeah, in particular, I would say. Yeah, great. So let's move on to 18. Okay, so today the United States, still by far prosperous country in the world, is increasing its working hours, creating a more positive balance between work and leisure time. I don't know, don't those two things contradict each other? Increasing working hours, creating a more positive balance between working and leisure. So, still by far, I think you'd have to say the most prosperous, and there is only one option that says that. Let's see if D makes sense then. Still by far the most prosperous country in the world is increasing its working hours instead of creating more positive balance between work and leisure time. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how this work-life balance thing that is very much a 20th, maybe 21st century problem, first world problem, has coincided with incredible rates of depression, or at least reported depression. So it's when you've got more time to think. Yeah. Just work more. It'll stop you thinking. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's got to be D. No, it's the most prosperous country in the world. It's increasing its working hours rather than, instead of creating a more positive balance between work and leisure time. Yeah, I think so. Let's move on. Okay, so in question 19, some very different options here. The telephone is at the centre of innovative technologies. I suppose it means mobile telephones, right? May alter forever. We receive and use information. So, yeah, so it's always changing and adapting, and basically our phone just does everything for us, doesn't it? It makes these videos for you, and for me. The centre of innovative technologies, which may alter forever, but we receive, so that What? So that may alter? No. That may alter forever how we receive and use information. C looks like a good option. As may alter? No. Whereas may alter? No. Yeah, it has to be C, right? It's at the center of these innovative technologies that may forever change how we. Yeah, it's got to be C. It's got to be. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the final question then, number 20, and it says, the editor thought that the new series of articles would prove very popular, but actually hardly seems to have been impressed by it. So he thought people would like these articles, but hardly nobody, hardly anyone, hardly the other, hardly any other, hardly somebody. Hardly is a negative adverb, so you'd have to say hardly anyone seems to be impressed, seems to have been impressed by it, by this new series of articles. Yeah, I think it has to be anyone. We got 20, and we got 100%, and we got it all right. Any questions? Leave them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.